What's up YouTube, welcome back to the channel, AuxOwl here. Today, we're building an overpowered LC10 class together from scratch. This is how I would go about creating an OP class for any weapon in Cold War, using the LC10 as an example. Keep in mind that you can use this process to create an OP class for any weapon in the game. Let's begin by looking at the base stats for the weapon that we want to build. Now we go to the gunsmith. I like to use the mounted flashlight for this, and then you click details. When you're in details, you can see the damage, the effective damage range, the bullet velocity, the recoil, sprint to fire time, and the aim down sight time. These are the most important metrics of any weapon. But what I like to do here is I like to record the most important stats, which are the ones that I mentioned, in a notepad somewhere. After recording all of the base stats somewhere, we do the same thing for two other really good weapons in the same category. And since we're looking to build an LC10, we want to look at the other SMGs. So two other specific SMGs that are really good would be the AK-74U and the MP5. So we're going to record the stats for both the AK-74U and the MP5. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go over here, go to the body, go to the mounted flashlight and details, and record them. The whole purpose behind this method of recording all the stats for all the other weapons too is that you get to really compare and contrast what your specific weapon is good at and bad at. Looking at the stats for the LC10 and comparing them to the AK-74U and the MP5, I noticed that the AK-74U has less range, and so does the MP5. The bullet velocity of the AK-74U and the MP5 are both lower than the LC10. Then we notice that the sprint to fire time is 350 milliseconds, which is actually exactly the same as the AK-74U and the MP5. So this weapon not only has a higher effective damage range and a higher bullet velocity, but it also has the same sprint to fire time, and it just happens to be that the aim down sight time is actually the same as the MP5 and lower than the AK-74U. So the takeaway from this is that the LC10 is actually an overall better weapon than both the AK-74U and the MP5, according to the stats. Now that we've determined what your weapon is strong and weak at, we can start checking out some preliminary attachments. So we want to look at the task force barrel. And in this case, it actually looks really good for the LC10 because we already have such a low recoil. So increasing it by a little bit in exchange for a lot of effective damage range and bullet velocity is totally worth it. Then let's move on to the muzzle slot and check out the agency suppressor. Attaching that will lower our effective damage range down to 15.88 meters, but remember this is an SMG, so we really don't want it to be too high anyway, so I do think it's worth lowering the small amount of vertical recoil that it already has in exchange for a bit of effective damage range, so let's do that. Then we look at the body attachments and we realize, you know what, maybe for now let's skip this and let's move on to the underbarrel where we can see all the attachments and everything that they would do. Now what do you want from this weapon? This is an SMG, so you don't want to hurt the shooting movement speed. You want to stay quick as you're shooting. That way you can strafe left and right. Now we notice that the foregrip helps out our horizontal recoil control, but we notice that this weapon already has really low recoil anyway, so let's skip that for now. Let's look at the next. This one helps out our melee while hurting everything else. We don't want to hurt our shooting movement speed, so anything that hurts it already, take it out on this one in this case. The patrol grip only helps out our sprinting, which we don't really care about. The bruiser grip is starting to look good because it helps out all of these stats. The field agent grip lowers our shooting movement speed by 30%, which is a lot. Usually this would be okay, but this weapon, because it has no vertical or horizontal recoil, we don't really care too much to lower the recoil in exchange for shooting movement speed. We actually want to keep that high. Lastly, we have the SFOD speed grip, but again, this hurts us too much and it doesn't really do much for recoil control. So let's move on from all these underbarrels. We don't really want any of them. Let's look at the stocks. Usually the stocks is in between the no stock and the radar stock. And in this case it's no different because we're looking at the tactical stock here. It helps out our aim walk and movement speed, but you don't really aim walk too much unless you're already shooting. So we care more about the shooting movement speed. Then the wire stock helps out our sprint to fire time, which is exactly what we want. Decreases it by 10%, which is good, but that's only about 35 milliseconds less. Then we have the duster stock, which helps out our slide speed, which, yeah, we're not doing that. The no stock attachment, which helps out our sprint to fire time by 30%. That means it lowers it by about 105 milliseconds. That already sounds great. In exchange for a little bit less hip fire accuracy. Then the SAS combat stock, which helps out our shooting movement speed and our aim walking movement speed. Now these two right here, this it would actually be a good contender for the LC10. And lastly, we have the Raider stock, which helps out our sprint to fire time by a lot, same amount as the no stock attachment, but it also helps out our aim walking movement speed. Now, our aim walking movement speed is already pretty good, so I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to try out the no stock attachment. Now, as we see how that changed our stats, now we want to actually look at the handle slot. Our new sprint to fire time, if we were to attach our airborne elastic wrap, would actually be 297 milliseconds, which is already a huge improvement from the usual 350 milliseconds. While our aim down sight time reduction goes from all the way from 275 milliseconds all the way down to 192.5 milliseconds, which is a huge decrease, over 80 milliseconds. Is that worth the increase from 245 milliseconds now with the new attachment? I would say so, because aim down sight time is more important than sprint to fire time in a lot of situations, unless you're hip firing. While with this weapon, we actually want to aim down our sights more than we really want to hip fire. So I'm actually going to attach the airborne elastic wrap because the help that it gives us here of over 80 milliseconds is way larger than the increase here in sprint to fire time of about 42 milliseconds. While it also hurts our shooting movement speed, but the shooting movement speed is still higher than our aim walking movement speed, so this actually looks really good. It's a good little exchange. Now you notice that we have one more attachment to fill out. Here we could either go for less recoil, which this weapon already has none, or more bullets, or faster reload. Now in this case, I think we might need some more bullets in exchange for a bit of a slower reload time. I think 15 extra bullets makes up for the 10% increase in reload quickness. Let's put that on because we don't want to use any of the other ones which decrease our aim down sight time. This decrease is totally unnecessary for all of these attachments, so we really only want to stick to these first two for the weapon. Now every weapon is different. I'm only saying that about this one because we don't necessarily want to be all up on their face 24/7, so you don't really need as quick of a reload. While maybe, just maybe you might want to use a fast mag, or maybe you even want to use a Vandal speed loader or 42 round speed mag. Just take into account your aim down sight time and what you really want to play with. In this case, we're going to go for the 45 round magazine. Now that we have our weapon fully attached, I'm going to change my appearance. I recently unlocked Dark Matter Ultra. That looks pretty good. Now that I've changed the appearance, I'm going to try this out, and if I don't like anything about how the weapon feels or behaves, I'm going to change it on the spot inside of the game. Now that we're in this game, we're trying to see how the gun feels, the aim down sight time, the sprint to fire time, see if you're comfortable, see if you're happy with the weapon, the reload time. Now anytime that you die, think about why. See if you can tell the reason why, if the reason why is any of the attachments that you put on, maybe anything that you could fix using attachments. Maybe you didn't aim down sight quick enough, maybe your recoil was a little too high. And as you're thinking about all these things, keep in mind what attachments you used and how they will affect the rest of the weapon. One of the most important things, in my opinion, to look at whenever you're doing testing matches like this is the magazine attachments. See if it's maybe just too many bullets, because any attachment that you might think is unnecessary, you could actually change out for something that would help you out a lot more. So you don't want to waste any attachment slots. In this case, I actually think 45 might be a little too much. I haven't really encountered a situation where I would need more than 45 bullets though. So maybe like that, where I just don't know how to aim a little bit. Now as things happen, maybe you know what, you have too many bullets and too much recoil. So maybe you actually take out that magazine attachment and attach a foregrip. Maybe you check that out and you like it. If you do, then keep it. You always want to be changing things around, see what you like, see what you don't like. So let's make an adjustment here. Maybe you have way too many bullets and maybe you actually want to control the recoil a little bit more. Let's try that out. Now that you've done that small change, let's check if it was actually beneficial to you. Maybe you thought the recoil was too much, but let's see. Okay, that feels good. I'm just trying to get into a few favorable gunfights so that I can truly test out what this feels like. Maybe it is beneficial to learn to control the recoil a little bit more in exchange for more ammo, because I feel like I'm reloading too much. So that change that I made on the fly, maybe it's not as good as I might have hoped. I mean, I'm still doing okay with the weapon, but I don't feel it's as smooth. It doesn't feel as good. So maybe I want to go back to my original idea, you know what, maybe 34 is good enough. You might change your mind a few times back and forth. Who knows? Who knows what you really might like, so just keep making changes. See what you enjoy. Maybe that change in recoil pattern actually was more beneficial than you thought. And now that the match is complete, I'm able to think about what happened there, what I thought about, what I liked and what I didn't like. And I've decided that I actually want to keep the 45 rounds in exchange for having to control a little bit more of the recoil. I'm okay with that. And that's how I've come to such crazy builds sometimes. In this case, the LC10 is still overpowered and we just came up with a really good build that you can use and have fun with. If you enjoyed the video and thought it was helpful, leave a like, put a comment down below, and check out my other builds. Owl out.